This episode is presented by DraftKings. DraftKings, the crown is yours.
Pablo Torre will be on with us in an hour. That story of his about the NFL colluding, even though an arbiter didn't rule technically that the NFL had colluded, that story is not going away. That story is going to continue to have stuff in it that is going to get found out, that is going to make it more and more problematic, especially since Don Van Natta is now sniffing around the proceedings, the Pulitzer Prize winner. And he's reporting, according to sources, that the NFLPA and the NFL agreed to keep collusion findings secret. And this is obviously problematic for a couple of reasons. And I wanted to ask Hawkins some questions about this before Pablo Torre comes on. But we talked yesterday about DeMaurice Smith having a book coming out. And one of the complaints that many people had about DeMaurice Smith inside of NFL players' circles was that DeMaurice Smith would be the type of person who would write a book when that's not the position that he is in. But very often, when you get a showy lawyer, when you get a lawyer who is interested in whatever, attention, bringing publicity to himself, not just his cause, you get a lot of people complaining about what his interests are. Right now, Lloyd Howell runs the Players Union, and there are reports about him having conflicts with NFL-related businesses because this is a pollutant throughout unions in the big sports where the membership doesn't necessarily trust that the person in charge of the membership is doing the bidding of just the membership. DeMaurice Smith was always accused of being very self-interested or distrusted by his own people, which is sort of, it's a bit inherent to the position,
yes.
right? It happens a great deal, not just to DeMaurice.
I'm happy you said that because out of all the sports, it seems like that is the most difficult one to be head of the Players Association for because of the very nature of that sport being so violent. There are only a few guys that survive in that league long enough to make money. So if you have something like a work stoppage on your clock, the vast majority of your player base is not there for very long. This is their opportunity to make money. If they lose half a season, they're losing potentially 30% of their pro career. So it is very difficult. It's like people forming opinions about the leadership in California, when California is an impossible state to govern compared to some smaller states. So I actually have a great deal of empathy for that position. It seems like it's one of the more difficult ones in sports.
It is because also there's so many people from so many different interests, right? Like to your point, even about California, like these are people from all over the map that have completely different views on a lot of these things. DeMaurice, in my experience or my opinion, even while I was a player, was I felt like he always wanted everyone to like him. And again, as someone who's been a part of the NFLPA, like through my family for years, literally almost my whole life, it was like this is a position where the person at the helm has to have a large amount of I don't give it. Like you can't care if anybody likes you. And when I would get into it sometimes, because I was a player rep, with the union when they'd come in, it was like every time we would visit or they would visit, it would always be all the great things that, we had or happened or, hey, we had this last CBA deal. This is what we got. This is what we got. But I never felt like they ever talked about all the things and the noise that was happening of like, hey, this is what we lost. This is what the issues would be. This is what the risks are. And I'm like, we can't actually be making the dent in what we're trying to make a dent if we can't call it exactly like it is. And so I would say, hey, don't come in here and tell us about all these great things. Let's talk about the hard things so we can actually make change. Like that was one of my criticisms. I also think we need to do a better job as football players or like as a union, I would say, of merging former players and current players. That was my position even as a player because I feel like experience is one of the most valuable assets in any profession. And by separating, keeping those things separate, the current guys never have that brain trust of information that will help them in their voting and their decision making. And number two is basically using the vehicle that we have to educate the next crop of players. Because even if it does stay how it is, the guys that are in high school now will be voting and making decisions for the guys that are currently in the league. And I know it's like, well, how do you know who's going to get to the NFL? yeah, it's a crapshoot. You don't really know. But I would tell you, of the top 300 players every year, 45% of them go to the NFL.
So it's somewhat of an indictment to say of DeMaurice Smith he was a little too interested in being liked. A greater indictment to me of him and others in that position is not necessarily that his constituency liked him or didn't like him, but do you or do you not trust him? And this reporting today by Don Van Natta is something that I'm telling you will have more consequences that will result in more discovery, because NFL players are now being informed by reporting that the NFL Players Union actively partnered with the NFL in keeping information away from the NFL Players Union's constituency. And once you get there, now players are asking really uncomfortable questions about, what do you mean you agreed to a confidentiality agreement with the NFL that doesn't give us the information about what you agreed to? What I'm telling you about DeMaurice Smith writing a book, and I understand why people would want it, and I understand why he would do it, especially after leaving. But the personality type who's in that position, who feels a great need to write a book, is exactly the criticism DeMaurice Smith was getting when he had the distrust of some of his clients and constituency, that he was a little too interested in how things looked for him as opposed to the group.
I will say, I had to Google it. I did not know the current NFLPA president at the moment because he's avoided news. And DeMaurice Smith did like the headlines. I don't think he's going to be able to avoid it anymore. I know that that's a criticism, wanting to be liked, but you're literally representing your players. You almost have to be liked by a huge segment of who you're representing. I will say, though, it was curious when DeMaurice Smith became the head of the NFLPA. It was a departure from what the NFL did. That league in particular, the players really put a premium on guys that actually played the game, representing their interests. And DeMaurice Smith did not have that pro player background. I guess that was a moment in time, Hawk, where they wanted someone with presidential acumen and executive level acumen because of the nature of the money that was coming into the business.
Look, and when I say wanted to be liked, I'm not talking about by players. I'm talking about by everybody. And you can't be liked by everybody when you are tasked with the interests of one specific group of people, right? To your point about Gene Upshaw, again, also had his shortcomings at times, but he did not give he would go toe-to-toe with anyone, and he was a former player, so you never questioned the motives or the things that he cared about deep down because you kind of identified with his life and his process to get to that point. You have to have a vested interest in what you're protecting. Like, I don't think this is a for-hire job, and you don't have to be a former player to have this job, but I feel like if you're making putting your hat in the ring for this very high-paid, very visible role, I need to be convinced of why you truly give a damn. Because that's what's going to matter, because this is hard. You're going to battle against billionaires in a business where you don't have leverage.
But take me inside your home as I give you this information. You're an NFL player, and I inform you, hey, there was a confidentiality agreement between the NFL and the NFLPA about how it is that collusion sort of happened, and that information was kept confidential, at least in part, so that the players wouldn't know what their union representatives had done on their behalf. Now take me, you're an active player, and I send you that information. Am I already, just by virtue of what it is I've told you about the entire history of all this, do you not have confirmation bias? Are you not already in a circumstance where you distrust your union leadership, and therefore this information arrives and it is confirming your bias? I do not trust the people who represent me.
I think you I won't even say that. I would say the current players that you have to realize, and this is what I'm talking about, of the way the system is set up, right? As a football player in the NFL, and I don't give a damn like if you're the last guy on the roster or you're making $50 million a year. It is hard to make the most of that and make as much money as you can without solely being focused there. Now, there are people who can have a foot in both lanes. So if you're asking me about current players, and every time I hear this conversation, whether it's on podcasts or whether it's, in the news or these things arise, you'd be surprised at how many current players aren't clocking this conversation because they drafted a guy at my position and I'm on the bubble. Or they're starting to give this guy more targets than me because they want me to take a pay cut, and or they're going to cut me if he has a bigger season than me. And I got to wake up at 5 a.m. tomorrow, and I got to do recovery, and I'm going to train till 1 o'clock, and I got to go eat. And it's just, I have kids. It's not as, big picture when you're in it as you think it is. That's typically because on the outside, you guys are seeing the big picture because we don't report on the day-to-day of what it takes to be an NFL player or the things they're considering and whatnot. And former players, they care more about it because they're on the other side. They no longer have the health insurance. They're no longer getting the $100,000 a game or $500,000 a game checks that they got for 8 years, 5 years, or what have you. And now they're like, well, I wish we would have done this. But even in that moment, if I could go back right now as a 39-year-old back in the NFL, and I would say, man, would I focus more on that? I wouldn't, because I think about the ways I could have made $10 more million. I don't think about, man, I wish I would have dug more into the CBA. And that's where I'm saying the system and how it's set up is not conducive to take those strides. So every time everyone else is surprised by it, I'm more surprised that you're surprised by it.
Well, the thing about your perspective, though, as an unrelenting survivor, and that makes sense, you're saying, look, I had to concentrate on the daily micro. I couldn't do the historic macro of perspective. Mm-hmm. And the grand majority of players in the league are more like you than the ones who are making the big money.
Right,
but if I were making the big money and I had my safety and I was not worried about the day-to-day survival, and this arrived on my on my information highway, and I'm a person who is expecting my union leadership to represent me, I would immediately start asking an assortment of questions about, what do you mean my own people were withholding information from me about possible collusion in my league?
Hawk, this one does seem a little bit easy from the player's perspective. This is collusion to keep everybody down at the highest level. I think people even at the lowest levels, it's not the disconnect that you'll have from a guy that's on the practice squad to Russell Wilson money. Mm-hmm. This is ownership groups and front offices getting together to keep wages down, and it doesn't time up with a work stoppage.
But it's not.
This seems like an easy win for the players to rise up.
Mike, it's not just to keep wages down, which is bothersome enough. It's not just that this happened 2 days after Deshaun Watson's guaranteed money, which is problematic enough. I'm more bothered if I'm a representative. If I'm somebody who's being represented by, I'm trusting because of the daily fight that Hawkins is talking about. Mm-hmm. I got to concentrate on beating my one guy in front of me because we're fighting over the same money. I'm mad that in any way my union is collectively bargaining a limit on my guaranteed money. But I'm angrier still that they entered into an agreement with the NFL where they didn't want me to have information, never mind money, just total information on what my situation is.
Right. Normally when the NFLPA and the NFL come to an agreement, you see the benefit for the players. I'm struggling to wrap my head around, like, what is the benefit of this secret agreement in which we have evidence that there was collusion to keep wages down, to collude against fully guaranteed contracts, because everyone outside of the sport and within the sport says, well, the Deshaun Watson contract kind of breaks the system a little bit. Are they going the way of NBA with guaranteed contracts? I really don't understand what the players gain from the NFLPA not making a huge mess of this situation, because great investigative reporting has kind of caught them red-handed, and it seems as though they put it on a wayward arbiter, but more and more evidence is stacking up. Do you think Roger Goodell is in his offices seeing daily news, whether it be about Bill Belichick, the game's greatest coach, or now this, and just crumples up a paper and says, "Get me the Batman," and it's popular?